Yeah. I had to redo it.
It's recording.
I'm not going to be one graph of it.
So just one more thing, just to get it in your head here. If you're asked to design an experiment, talk about your control group. Talk about it's going to only be one variable and everything else is going to be the same. And talk about what's going to be the same. Same light, same temperature, same food, same everything, only varying one thing. Figure out what type of graph you have to do, if it's continuous data or not. Do multiple trials using multiple organisms if you can. If you put all that in an essay about experimental design, you should do well. Okay? Very likely to get that question. I'm actually predicting that will be a question on this exam. Do I have inside information? I do work for the company that creates the exam. I don't have any inside information, but it's amazing how often I've guessed the right essays. Pretty good at this. Okay, so we have what's going on here? What is this graph of? Do you remember?
S curve. It is actual growth.
No.
It's actual growth.
It's growth of what?
Population.
A population. Most populations grow like this. The population will go up, and then we'll level off. Why does it level off? Why not just keep going up forever?
Resources.
Run out of resources, and we call these resources limiting factors. And we want to talk about those limiting factors some. Limiting factors slow down the growth. The growth of a population is limited by different factors, such as predators eating you, disease, lack of food, natural resources, how much oxygen do the organisms have. There's all sorts of limiting factors out there. Any one of them can stop the population growth. So, we have the limiting factors are categorized into two groups. And those groups are called density-dependent factors and density-independent factors.
What's an abiotic?
Abiotic means not living. Biotic means living.
Because in the book it calls them it said that natural disasters and all that kind of stuff were abiotic.
Yes, that means an earthquake, a fire, a flood. These are non-living things, right? That can affect a population. These are abiotic factors. They're limiting factors that can affect a population. A fire is density independent. So is a flood, so is an earthquake. These can affect your population, right? A fire goes through a forest. What's it do to the population of the forest?
Destroys it.
Pretty much wipes it out. If it's large creatures, there are some plants that can easily survive fires, and maybe things under the ground. But a lot of big creatures would be wiped out, or they'd leave the area. And so the population of the area is affected. And that's a density-independent factor, meaning it doesn't matter how many organisms there are. They're affected pretty much the same. It doesn't. If there's 2 organisms, there'll be 0 after the fire. If there's 2,000 organisms, there'll be 0 after the fire. You see what I'm saying? It's density independent. Doesn't matter about the density of the population. Here's an example. Here's an area where there's a low density of mice. There's only 4 mice there. 5 mice. And a flood came through and it killed 3 of the 5 mice. Do you know what percentage that is? 3 out of 5? 60%. Will you stay championship math thing?
Yes.
I don't think so. 60% of the mice were killed. Here's a high density of mice. There's 20 mice there. How did I count it so fast? I'm like Rain Man. And 60% of the mice were killed. How many is that? out of 20? 12 of the 20 were killed by the flood. So 60% of the mice are killed in either scenario. It doesn't matter how many mice you have. So that's a density independent factor. Let me give you a density dependent factor. Density dependent factors depend upon how many you have.
Wait, so the first one was independent?
Floods are independent of density, fires, earthquakes, natural disasters. Those types of things are density independent. Meteors. Density dependent factors depend upon the density. Space, habitat, is a density dependent factor. Here we have holes in trees. If we have a low density of birds, there's plenty of holes in the trees the birds can live in. The holes in the trees, by the way, are produced by fungus that grow into the tree and eat up the tree.
Isn't fungus bad for the birds?
Nah. Just eats up the tree, doesn't affect the bird. So anyway, the birds can live fine if it's a low density. But if there's a high density of birds, there's some without a place to live. And they're going to get killed by the hogs. Oh. So habitat is having enough space is something that affects high density different than it affects low density. Are you all with me here? That means it's density dependent. I'll give you another example. Disease. Disease is density dependent. If you have a very low number of individuals, you're not going to have much disease because disease is spread from one individual to another. A guy living alone on a farm isn't going to get many diseases. People scrunched up in a big city on a subway, coughing on each other, they're going to spread disease like crazy.
They are not.
Disease is density dependent. What about, let me ask you, I'll give you one. Predation. Write down, don't yell it out. Predation. Getting eaten by predators. Do you think that's density independent or density dependent? How many think density independent?
For predators?
For getting eaten by predators. How many think it's density dependent? Density dependent has it, and they're right. If there's a whole bunch of organisms around, predators are going to be feasting. It's easy to find them, you see.
But they don't.
Bunch of rabbits in the field. The hog flies over. Oh my gosh! Look at all those rabbits. It's gonna start feasting and call in its rabbit friend. Its hawk friends.
But the predators don't care if there's if they see one rabbit, they're still gonna eat it.
That's correct. But predation usually picks up in its effect when there's a lot of organisms around, because for one, they can find them easier, and for two, they'll communicate and call in their buddies. That's the example I was giving right there. Which do you think predation would be more successful? Here or here? More successful here. See, the hawk comes down, these mice would just jump right into holes. These hawks come down, these mice, well, there's not enough holes for everybody. Some are going to get eaten, so predation is more effective at high density populations. Yes? Yes! Great question. Yeah?
What about the saying, safety in numbers? Does that apply to, large herd animals?
That might apply to things that can protect themselves.
So less of a chance of being
in a group, yeah. So,
like in the Savannah of Africa, you have all the zebras.
Yeah.
They're all one giant group, and all those other animals, right?
Or, fish that schooling behaviors can be, or birds that form flocks, a predator can't catch one of them. But that's kind of a special instance. Okay, so that's density dependent and independent. It talks about that some on page 847. That's 44.4. Now 44.5 talks about strategies for survival of organisms. And we actually have two different strategies that we see in nature for surviving long term. You have your R strategists or your opportunistic species. A lot of different types of weeds are like this. Small individuals, short lifespans, quick to mature. These flowers grow and get pollinated and release their seeds all in 1 year. Many offspring. How many baby plants is this plant going to have? Every little seed has a little parachute and floats away. Y'all have flown on these things before, right? You make a wish when you do it?
Doesn't come true.
Doesn't? Your wishes are too great. Little or no care of offspring. Many offspring die before reproducing. And they have an early reproductive age. We call these R strategists. R meaning it has a high rate of reproduction. The R value is very high for these. They can grow very quickly and go into an area and produce great numbers very fast. They have a high R value. Can you think of an animal? Write down, without yelling out, write down an animal that might be an R strategist. And I'll call on somebody. An animal that might be an R strategist. Small individual, short lifespan, fast to mature.
Animal?
An animal, not a plant. I was going to call on someone. Okay, no one can say cockroaches. You're right. Savannah, you got an animal?
I was going to say bunnies, but bunnies aren't.
Bunnies! Okay, well, no, that's bunnies to some extent. They are small. They have short lifespan, maybe, relatively. Actually, some of them can live kind of long. So that's kind of, but they do. They are fast to mature. They do produce many offspring, bunnies do. So I would say bunnies, yeah.
Mosquitoes.
Mosquitoes, absolutely.
Fish.
Jessica, what were you going to say?
Yeah.
Ants.
Morning.
Good.
We have two announcements this morning. All varsity football players are to be in the seminar room during break this morning. And second, there's a mandatory varsity girls and boys soccer meeting at 10 o'clock in the gym. Thank you.
Now, the other type of individual that you see in nature is a K strategist. Large individuals, long lifespans, slow to mature. Few offspring, large offspring, much care of offspring. Most young survive to reproductive age, and they do better in stable environments. These are K strategists, yes.
Okay, so ants are R strategists.
I would say ants are our strategists.
But
Yeah.
does that like include whether they're more like individualistic or like focus more on collective?
Not necessarily.
So these groups have nothing to do with that.
Not necessarily, no. Sometimes it's just probably a relationship there, but it's not necessarily if they live individual or in colonies. Did you have a question, Lee?
No.
Okay.
An example?
So, bears are an example there.
Humans.
Anyone raise your hand? Another example?
Humans.
Humans.
Dolphins.
Dolphins.
Elephants.
Elephants. Jessica, did you have one? You were going to say
Kangaroo.
humans? What's that?
Kangaroo.
Kangaroos. Yeah. Dinosaurs. Why not?
The dinosaurs.
Redwood tree. Redwood tree, they are very large and long lifespan and slow to mature. They have a lot of offspring though. So they're kind of a little bit of a mix. But we call these K strategists. What does K mean? Do y'all remember what K was?
The actual group.
K was the carrying capacity. So you had this line that went up like that and then leveled off at the carrying capacity. And these organisms that are K strategists tend to live their lives at the carrying capacity of an environment. And they can live, since they have these long lifespans, they can survive times where times are tough. And for instance, let's say there was a fire or something in the forest, and the carrying capacity, a lot of food wasn't produced for several months. Or maybe, let's not say a fire, because that might kill the bears. Let's say a drought. There's a drought, and the carrying capacity fell off for several months. Well, the organisms are long-lived, so they have a way they can store food, they can hibernate and kind of get through this drought and survive. The K strategists usually hang out at the carrying capacity of the environment, and they can survive times of trouble. The R strategists, their populations usually go up and down rapidly because they have a short lifespan. If there's a drought, if there's a bad freeze one winter, all the gnats are gone, And then when time gets better, all of a sudden they can reproduce very quickly and fill a niche. So they kind of have two different ways of going about things. And both ways work. And that's why we see both types of animals or plants. R strategists and K strategists. There's a dead deer. Don't know why it's doing that. When a population grows too large. It's an extra reading section on page 850. When a population grows too large, some of the organisms are going to die. I bet that's what it's saying.
That's why we go hunting.
Yeah, control hunts to get the numbers down. The last section, 44.6, talks about human population. And this is good to study. It's most of the problems we have on the planet right now are due to large population. There's not enough food. There's not enough power. Things are expensive. There's all this pollution. All this crime, There didn't used to be a lot of crime when there's plenty of stuff around. But there's less stuff. And so people are stealing other people's stuff. Look at this population growth curve right here. Now, the less developed countries are countries like India and a bunch of countries in Africa. They don't have much money, and they have very high population growth. They don't, a lot of places, one of the ways to get wealthy is to have a bunch of kids and then have the kids work for you, see? Then you have to pay for labor. And so one of the old ways to ensure you had a workforce was to have a bunch of kids. But you see a lot of kids in less developed countries. They don't have much birth control. They don't have much knowledge about those sorts of things. They don't go to school as much. You see this great population growth in the less developed countries. So you have a tendency to say, well, the less developed countries are the problem. But that's not exactly true. The more developed countries, like the United States and in Europe and China and other places, the more developed countries, look at their, only 22% of the population is more developed countries. But 90% of the hazardous waste production is more developed countries. 60% of the fossil fuel consumption is more developed countries. 80% of the metal consumption. 75% of the paper consumption. The more developed countries, one person from America produces as much waste as 20 people from India. And so there's a problem here with both. There's a problem with the amount of population. There's a problem with the amount of consumption. So all of these are problems that you're going to have to grow up with and face. hopefully figure out solutions for. This is an age structure diagram for a more developed country. Do you remember how to read this thing?
Bottom's the offspring.
Look at the difference for a less developed country.
The top is
It's like the same.
The top is old people. The middle is people who are in their reproductive years, who can have kids, basically age 15 to 40. And here are at the lower, the kids. The kids are at the bottom. So, wow, a lot of kids here, right? And this population is going to continue to grow because there's more kids than parents. And those kids are going to grow into parents. So these countries that look like this are rapidly growing countries. And I have a little video on that. We run out of time here, but look at all my videos.
That's just for APBio.
Yep.
So where do you store
I don't
those?
show them all.
Just like on the hard drive?
Yeah, this is on the M drive. You can go to them. Not sure if you want to.
Alright, the block is pretty tough. Try to keep it out.
walk in, jump in the shower.
Here we go. Oh no, wait, that's my note.
Picture the developing world. Too many people on the edge of survival. Fouling the land, water, air. Compounding a crisis of poverty. It is the very face of overpopulation.
You know, sounds bad when it flies off.
But what about this? It's a middle-class suburb outside San Francisco called Pleasant Hill. And it really is a nice place to live. Nice houses, nice cars, plenty to eat. The size of an average household, about 2.4 people. Certainly a place like this has nothing to do with overpopulation. Or does it?
What you got to remember is that overpopulation is not just an issue of how many people there are.
Not only of how many people there are, but of how much impact each person has.
These are the bakers of Pleasant Hill. Ellen, Dan, and their 2 children. They don't plan to have any more.
No. I don't think of ourselves as being overpopulated. I come from a very large family, so 2 kids is a very small family to me.
These are the Quirals of Gorga, a crowded mountain village in Nepal, one of the poorest countries in the world with one of the fastest growing populations. So far, Sukuyama and Gopal Quiral have had 6 children, the national average. Which of these 2 families, which of their nations would you call overpopulated?
Generally, one can say that the birth of a baby in the United States is on the order of 30 times as big a disaster for things like global climate change, the ozone layer, acid precipitation, and so on, as a baby born in a poor family in Nepal, Bangladesh, Colombia, or wherever.
According to the UN, the industrialized world, with only a quarter of the planet's people, uses 3/4 of its energy. 85% of its wood products, 72% of its steel. It also spits out 3/4 of all carbon dioxide emissions. Half the damaging greenhouse gases in the atmosphere.
The single biggest impact that makes the United States overpopulated is that it's 240 million people driving cars. And 240 million people driving cars are incredibly more damaging to the planet and the environment than a billion people who don't drive cars.
The Quirals of Nepal don't have a car. The bakers have 2. The Quirals walk to work in the fields and everywhere else they go. The Bakers belong to a society literally designed around the automobile.
It isn't just the things that's spouting out of the tailpipe of the car, or off of the brakes, or the rubber that's evaporating into the atmosphere as it drives. It's also, of course, the costs, the environmental costs of building the automobile.
But it's around the house that the disparity becomes even more clear. The 8 members of the Nepali family live in a hut made of some wood and a lot of mud. They prepare their sparse meals, heat and light their home with fuel wood, candles, and a little kerosene, all of which have some negative impact on the environment. But compare it to the family of 4 in the USA, living in a house made of wood, steel, and hundreds of pounds of plastic.
For which we had to refine oil and produce various toxic chemicals which have been dumped into aquifers.
So what's for dinner?